denizens of the internet. This is Kira Una coming to you today, and today we are going to learn about corset making. So I hope you all join me on this little adventure. Now, before we get started in on the corset creation, I do want to preface a few things. First of all, this underbust corset that you will be seeing me make is a little too big. I still had to make some adjustments on the corset pattern itself, and it was still too big even after I took it in several inches. So like right now, I am currently wearing it, and it is just tight enough that it gives me enough back support, but it still kind of bunches a little bit in the back at the waist ties. So first pass, not so bad. I'll still have to go in and make some adjustments on my final pattern. Secondly, keep in mind that your measurements are just a number. You too can still wear a corset if you want to. So don't let anybody shame you for your body size or type. With that said, let's get into the sewing, shall we? Hello and welcome, denizens of the internet, to my ironing table and filming center once again. Today we are parsing out what we're learning in college for corsetry class. That's right, I am in college. I am taking multiple courses. The two courses that I'm taking this semester is the Millinery Part 3, so I can get the certificate, which is essentially hat making. And one of the construction things that we have to do this semester is a skull cap, which is hardened like a rock, and essentially, I have to put the grosgrain ribbon all the way around it. But that's not why we're here. We are not here for millinery things today. That is something that I will be working on the rest of the week and probably tomorrow. And in the meantime, we're going to be working on corsetry. Now, I will be filming this in sections and segments and things like that, so as I get into mock-up phasing and all that sort of thing, this will occur over several days. I'm doing this so A, that I can parse everything else that I've learned at the same time, as well as create content that is easily understandable for all of you to follow along, for all of you folk out there. For corsets, there's a lot of pieces. This is not a full overbust corset. This is going to be an underbust corset. However, my final project will be an overbust corset. Now, not all corsets are going to fit everyone out of the box. You're probably going to have to do some fitting and some adjustment so that you don't do what they suggest that they have done historically, which is absolute BS, in that they strangled their organs with these corsets by tight lacing. If you ever want to see anything on tight lacing, go watch Abby Cox's videos, or Bernadette's videos, or Nicole Rudolph's videos. I'm sure there's a lot of YouTubers out there that have done a whole deep dive on corsetry and how not to hurt yourself in the process of wearing them. For this, we have several pieces. As you can see, there's 6 pieces here. Typically, it's a front and a back with a bunch of pieces in the middle. And all of this will be mirrored. So you have 12 pieces for the front. And then for the lining, you have 12 pieces again. So you have 24 pieces that you have to sew together. I know it seems like a lot. As long as you keep your notches straight, there's nothing to worry about. So I'm going to take a moment and talk about some of these pieces. So this is the pattern that the school gave us for our little mock-up. This is no way in shape, any shape or form, going to fit me because it is way too small and it is not long enough. Actually, the length isn't terrible on this. I think I might just have to widen it because I am not... How big is this corset? It's tiny. It's like maybe 25 inches, 26 inches around. It's very small. I would have to do a fair bit of sizing up. You have your center front and your center back. You can tell which one is which because this is incredibly straight. This is the center front, or at least this edge is the center front. And then this edge is the center back, where all the grommet holes are going to go. This red line here, that is going to be your waist tape. They are slightly angled because bodies are round and it has to conform around the waist on this line. So there will be a slight up or a slight down depending on the piece. And then of course you have your grain lines. Now this pattern has some weird seam allowances, but that's okay, we can work with that. The seam allowance for along these straight edges is 5/8, and the seam allowance across the top and the bottom is 3/8. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now you'll see a whole bunch of these pieces here telling you what's what. For the center front and center back, you use your fashion fabric as normal. However, you are going to also want to use your fashion fabric for the internal facing, the part that faces the body. So then that way, along these edges, you get a nice clean finish. However, if you have a fashion fabric that is really scratchy or coarse that you don't want pressing up against the body, because it is assumed with this pattern that is worn as a bare skin item, not normally recommended. If you're going to wear a corset on a regular basis, please wear something underneath it, like a tank top or something, so then that way it's not chafing or rubbing or hurting you in any way, shape, or form. But with that said, essentially you want to make your entire outer shell out of your fashion fabric, and then you're going to want to make these pieces out of your fashion fabric as well. And you're also going to want to take these two pieces and add some interfacing into it to give it a bit of stability. Now last night, because I goofed on the order of operations, started sewing, and then I realized I basted the wrong things together. The instructions I thought were not very clear. I don't know if it was just I was having a bad day, but I misunderstood some of the instructions, so I had to recut this again. Even though the teacher said it was fine and I didn't need to, I felt the need to make it a little cleaner. So I have my front, and I have a marker here saying it's F for facing. So that means it's part of the lining section. Same thing with this. And then I took the outer shell. All of this is in muslin just to save on my coutil, because coutil is expensive. Coutil is a strength layer of the outer shell or the outer fashion fabric to give the fabric some stability. If you cannot get coutil, you can interface the entire front panels of your garment, which is what I did here. So all of these pieces here is going to be from front to back. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And all of these pieces are just muslin because it is a mock-up. So it's got very plain fabric. I might take a portion of today and maybe do something fun with the outside shell, just to give it a little bit of character, because even though it's a mock-up, it's a really boring mock-up. So I want to make it look a little nicer. So I might take like a stamp or some, I don't know, fabric markers and draw something on them. Actually, what I might do is sew it up, then pencil over top of it with the fabric markers with something floral or something. Yeah, actually that sounds like a fun idea. I might actually do that, because, you know, if I'm gonna make a corset, and I mean, this may fit somebody. I'll figure out what the final waist size is at some point. I'll figure it out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to the machine. I'm going to sew each one of these seams, and then I'm going to press it open. And then I'm going to take my other pieces for the facing, which is in this bag, and my other lining pieces, which is all right here, because I cut them all out last night. And I'm going to sew those together so I have all 24 pieces sewn up together. So this will take me a little bit of time, but it'll be worth the wait.
1 hour later.
I don't know about any of you out there, but is it me, or does muslin, when it's being ironed or just used in general, especially when it's heated, does it smell like, I don't know, pickles or something to you? Because I always find that it has a very strange smell, especially if it hasn't been washed. It's very peculiar. I don't know, maybe it's just me. So keep in mind, this marker is water soluble. The other ones I will be using are not. So I need to back this with something. Sure, I'll use this. It's just a chemise pattern from the pattern I had to print out because I needed to print out all the pages. So I'm just going to use what I had to tape together as a precautionary for my ironing board so I don't get stuff everywhere. Now, the one thing that we have to remember with this sort of design is that the front is going to fold over for the busk at the 5/8. So I may pin this down just so I know where the busk sits. So then that way I can design something without it getting too much in the way. As I'm working on this, I'll probably like draw a little bit off the center just so that it blends in. Now, I know that flowers and roses are big this year. I am not necessarily a very floral person. I mean, I don't hate them, but it's just not necessarily me. I am more of a October, Halloween, fall vibes kind of person. So what kind of design do I want to do? Maybe I'll do something kind of, I don't know, grassy, cottagecore-y. This is just so I can see what I'm going to be doing. So let's do... I realize this will be sort of upside down to you, so I may have to flip the camera so you can see what I'm drawing from my kind of perspective. So let's do, and 3/8 for the bottom, so just an extended. It's alright if the knobs from the busk go through the middle. I like sort of my vines and berries, so I think that's what I'm going to do. It doesn't have to be super, I don't know, precise. Is this going to be symmetrical? Nah. It'll look cute though. I'll remember where that's supposed to go. It's fine. And then I've got a little shooty thing coming out here for the berries. And then I'll just sort of make random, less symmetrical berries as it goes around the middle. So I'll just draw that out. And each one of these little stems is going to have berries on it, so. Just remember, this is just a sample. Just remember, this is just a sample. Oh, you know what? I forgot to pin the center back. I should do that. I was wondering why something didn't look right. There we go. I think that'll look really cute. Alright, let me find some markers. Alright, I found some markers. Let's hope they work. These are a type that will set in 24 hours. It's also hard to draw on curvy surfaces. Now I can hear some of you out there, but what if the stitching is seen over top of your drawing? I'm fine with it. Because if all else fails, I can always go back over it with this as long as the thread's gotten. And then just let it sit for another 24 hours and it'll be fine. Everything's all ironed, it's all good. So we'll let this dry for the next 24 hours and this will be all good to go. I have my lining over at my sewing table, so that will all get packed up and ready for school for next week. Now, what we're going to be doing next week, because everybody's in different stages, we'll have to see. But once I figure out and find out what we're doing next, I will let you all know.
72 hours later.
So from the miniature one that I made, I found that the length is fairly decent. Width around the body is not nearly long enough. I don't know about you, but I don't have a 22-inch waist, which is the size of how that sampler piece is going to be. But the length from like the under bust down to the stomach area, like past the waist, that I think will fit fine. So what I did is I took a moment to essentially upsize the sample to potentially fit me. Like you can see the glue that I had here for where I essentially stuck it down, so then that way I could slash and spread it onto these pieces. This is just to make it a little bit easier for myself to copy it. If this pattern works out, this will be my permanent template for an underbust corset. So I have all my notes. How I changed the seam allowance a little bit so it's 1/2 inch. If I need to, I will put in boning channels to stick the boning into. Essentially, what I'll need to do this mock-up is I'll just do a basic muslin for the front only, just to get a general idea of the shape. And then if that fits, I will start cutting out some fashion fabric, and I'll make this out of some zip tie boning for now, just to see how well it fits once I get some grommets in and things like that. I'm gonna cut this out, do the mock-up, and see how it fits. I'm going into voiceover mode because of the noise in the background. I'm trying here to showcase the stiffness of the coutil, which is what we'll be using for the outer layer of the corset. It's a very stiff fabric that's very sturdy, which makes for great support. Now on to the layout of the pattern. We're going to take our pattern pieces and ensure that it's aligned on the grain with the selvage edge. The selvage edge is that raw manufacturing edge that runs along the sides of the fabric where the weft is woven from side to side. The grain of the fabric is the warp threads that run down the fabric from top to bottom. The longest threads on a piece of fabric are most likely your warp threads, which run through the entire length of the fabric. If you run out of fabric on the grain in regards to corsetry, some fabrics you can get away with by putting it on the cross grain. The cross grain is where you align your grain line on the weft threads. It's not necessarily ideal for fabrics such as brocades or satin. For each corset pattern piece for the outer layer, at minimum we will need to cut 2. Any excess coutil on either the straight grain or the cross grain will save as much as we can for our boning channels. Why let good stiff scraps go to waste? When setting up your pieces to be cut on grain, using a clear ruler is very handy to ensure that your project is as on grain as possible. If you don't have a clear ruler, using a tape measure and pinning the grain line at both ends of the grain line marker before cutting will also work in a pinch. For marking your project, you can use whatever you like, but I personally prefer a water erase marker. Occasionally I'll use a Frixion marker or some other type of heat erase pen. I usually use one that's white that's made by Clover to mark out my project for darker fabrics. I swear the pen works, it's just a little bit faint on this fabric. It's also a little new, so it likely needs to be broken in a little bit. Now, if you're using a silk or satin and you're likely going to get your project done in a day, you may want to use a sublimation chalk which fades within a day. If not, and you don't rub out your tailor's chalk too quickly, you can use that as well. Or you can just use little marking cut clips in your fabric within the seam allowance to mark your alignment marks for where your boning channels are going. Or you can use an awl to make little what is called drill holes for anything else like eyelet or grommet placement marks. This is the underbust corset pattern that I have adjusted. This has been taken down, I believe, by a bit. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna pause this and measure out the waist for a second. My math could be off on the final number because it's saying that it should be 38 inches. I'm a 47. I don't squeeze down that much. But you know, fabric is not the same as bodies. Plus there's also a couple of inches in the back where it needs to lace up, which you can add a modesty panel if you feel the need to, but because I'm planning on wearing all these as undergarments, I don't need to. I was going to adjust the top a little bit to scoop a little bit more under the bust, because I find when I sit down, it just crams my breasts up a little high. I know it's supposed to give it a little bit of support, but it gets kind of uncomfortable, to be honest. And I find it digs a little bit just under the arms. So I might scoop it down to that 3/8 and then just lower it a little bit all the way across the top. So I think that's what I will do, because this point is fine. So it means I also need to lower it about 3/8. Just a little bit. Nothing crazy. So I'm gonna do that by centering it up and lowering my notch. For 2, 3, and 4, it's gonna scoop down and then come back up. And we're gonna use our curvy curve to kind of do that, because this feels good. I just need a little bit more curvature at the breast line. So, because I'm okay with it coming down that much. And then I'll have that there. Or do I want to, because I have to accommodate for the bust. Maybe like, let's give us a little bit more. I'm playing right now. And no, I'm not gonna do a mock-up. I like to live dangerously here. Let's do to there. So it sort of forces it to curve up. Now, because I'm taking a pattern drafting class, to make my life easier, this is called a notcher. This is a tool to notch paper, like so. And if you ever find one at, like, if you're thrifting for tools and supplies, if you ever find one that looks like this, it is for pattern making. So it's a good find if you find one. I bought this off of a local company called the Leather Sewing and Supply Store. It's down on Queen Street. I order online because it's easier for me to get there, because I don't live close to downtown and I don't like having to go out to schlep halfway across town to come back and spend 3 hours in transit to get one thing. Hopefully to make this video a little less confusing than it may already be for those of you who are following along, I'll talk a bit about the process. I've already cut out all of the pieces for the lining and the outer coutil. Next, what we'll do is out of the extra leftover coutil, I'm going to cut out some of the boning channel strips. These are cut on the straight of grain to make the channels that will go over each seam. Depending on the style of corset, you can use as many or as few boning channels as you like. Then I'm going to iron on my interfacing to the panels 1 and 6 on the lining side. Next, I'll sew all of those pieces together and press those seams open. There's dots that you can see all across. That is essentially the waist marker where the waist tape needs to go. So I will need to sew this into the seam allowance all across where the dots match up to give the waist tape a little bit more stability. I don't have the instructions on how to do this just yet from my teacher at school, but I have watched a whole bunch of YouTube channels on how to do this, so that makes me an expert on making corsetry, right? Right? So I'm going to essentially sew here, sew here, sew here, sew here, like all the way across this tape to stabilize the waist. Then I'm going to put in the boning channels, and I got to figure out how many I need. I will need probably one at the center front, which is this panel here, and I put the numbers at the very top of each one so I know which side is up, which side is down.
For findings and notions, we have our zipper, which we'll be cutting short so that it's long enough for the entire center front of the corset, which for modern everyday frequent use, it is far easier to get in and out of corset using a zipper as the busk, especially handy for anyone who has a physical limitation where using the metal button busk may be hard to get in and out of. Next we have our bones, which I will be using 1/2 inch wide Ridgeline. For a beginner corset, you can also use zip tie bones, or alternatively you can use synthetic baleen, steel bones, or spiral bones depending on your preference. For the back closure, we'll be using double-sided grommets, and we'll be using a number 00, or also known as 3/16 inch size. And just for this project, to tie the corset up in the back, we'll be using shoelaces, because I don't have any flat lace at the time of filming.
I'm going to take the waist tape, go across the front for both halves of the coutil side, or the fashion fabric side. Then I'm going to install boning channels. I'm debating, I just put it over top of the seam allowance, like so, all the way across, and then add the two that go for the center back. So this is the center back, and this is the top of the center back. So I'm going to probably need to put in a bone here, and put in a bone here, because the eyelets are going to go here. And then I'm going to add the bones all along here. And then I'm probably going to fold this over to make a seam allowance so that I can know where the zipper goes in. And then butt this boning channel right up against it to give it a little bit of extra strength. And then of course one will go all along the seams. So essentially this will look, it will kind of look like this. And then of course you'll have the other half on the other side as well. And then you'll have a bone running alongside this zipper, and then another bone here, another bone here. I mean, when you get to the point of it, even my teacher said you can add as many or as few bones as you like. So since this is my first tailor-made corset to me, I'm going to keep the boning fairly light, except where it really needs the extra strength at the center front and center back, which is where the extra bones are going to go. And instead of using boning channels, like the pre-made boning channels, I'm just going to use these strips of the coutil and just slap it over top, sew each side, and slide the bones in to measure out how much I need, and then it'll be clean finished at the top and the bottom. So we're going to set up our bones. This is the Ridgeline sort of plastic boning. There are different types of bones, but this is what I'm going to use today. And I'm going to essentially figure out how many along the corset we need. And then I gotta make it twice. I should have enough of this for both panels. And then I'm going to essentially cut them to length, number them so I know where it goes, but I'm going to use the Frixion markers because it will come out with heat, because we're going to essentially use a little bit of heat to bend the corset into a more ideal shape, because the boning will change shape with heat and a little bit of steam. Now, the reason we're using a Frixion marker on the inside of the boning is so then that way it will come off with heat, and we're also going to have any numbers facing towards the body, so then that way it's not seen. So I've got my pliers, and then I've got my numbers, my panels numbered on each side. So this is the top, so I know which way it goes. And we'll have to figure out how many boning channels we have. When we get into sewing them in for the final, essentially what's going to happen is I'm going to cut them down a little bit and sand the edges so it's not sharp, because sharp bones will cut through your seams at the top and the bottom, and you'll wind up with a broken corset, and you don't want that. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm just going to mostly eyeball it and use pliers to cut. You might have to use some scissors or use whatever you have, just not your good sewing scissors when you're cutting this. If it's a metal boning, you will definitely need cutting snips, and you may also need caps. Depends on how you have a cutting implement for metal boning. And I'm gonna do essentially for between panels, I'm gonna do 1 and then 2. So that way I know where the bone is gonna sit between which panel. And then I'm gonna do 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, and then 6A, and possibly 6B. So I'm gonna do that all the way along, and then we'll go back to the sewing machine to sew in the channels. So I have this foot here set up so I can get right up against, just like trying to put in an invisible zipper. I'd prefer to use my industrial feet for this, but it's not made for this specific model of machine. And then, just to protect our peepers, we're going to use some safety goggles, just in case I hit the bone, because it's better to be safe than sorry.
One eternity later.
After sewing all the boning channels into place, we're going to get out our PPE again to cover our eyes. And yes, I should have been wearing a mask at the bare minimum as well. We're going to get out our sanding block. We're going to cut down the tips of the corset bones to make sure they're at least ½ inch shorter on each side to ensure there's seam allowance on the openings of the boning channels. Then we'll clip the bones into semi-rounded shapes and sand those edges down so that we have a nice soft curved tip.
2,000 years later.
Now we'll attach the lining layer to sandwich the zipper to sew up the center front, the center back with the lining, and the coutil layers. This is also sewn with the bones in, sewing all the way around the edges with the exception of a gap at the bottom edge to be able to turn the corset inside out.
Right, so while I have the iron heating up, essentially I'm going to take my vodka and spray. This I find it works better as a very light starch rather than like a cleaning solution, but it makes things smell nice, and it's also going to help me to get rid of these marks. Now, because this is a water-soluble marking pen, I should spray it. See, and then it starts fading right away. Scooch it a little and it disappears. So I'm going to essentially spray everywhere that has a marking before I get into the ironing. I'm going to do it on the front and the back, but this will also help us to sort of coax the bones into a proper shape. That one might need a little bit more oomph because it is the coutil, and I got really close to the zipper here, which I'm really happy with, because if we take both pieces right now, we can do it up, and oh, look at that, that looks so satisfying. Oh, I am so happy. Okay, that looks pretty damn good. Let me finish spraying this. I had to take a look at that. If you really need to, you can take it, because one of the edges is open, and just spritz on the inside as well, just to really get all those markings out. I mean, you don't have to, well, I mean, you could soak it if you really wanted to, but you don't have to. We are going to try and get the center front, because this is the zipper, you can tell it's the center front. It is not a nylon zipper, it's a metal zipper, which has the added strength, so you don't really have to worry about it melting. So we're going to press this down, and the extra water and maybe a little bit of the vodka will help to not only remove those marks, but also to help to coax the bones into a better shape. See, that's starting to look a little bit less curvy and a little better as it already. That's always a bonus. If you happen to have your Teflon plate on your iron, try not to scratch it up on the zipper. Make this a little less curvy, because I'm curvy, but I'm not that curvy. And this will also help to line up the top and bottoms, because I don't think we'll be able to do top stitching on that. Press all that down. If you happen to have a clapper, now would be a good time to use it. I don't have a clapper per se. What I do have though is just the downsides of having 50 billion projects on the go all at once. So if you happen to have just a plain piece of wood, you can certainly use that as a clapper board to get it really flat where you need it. See, there we go. That looks nice. And we want to kind of get this center back piece a little bit more flatter. And we also really want to get a crisp edge here, because this is the very center back, and we're going to be putting a bone in there. And we're going to be top stitching that into place to support the grommets. Now, the reason why I had you sew up to the bottom of the center back is so that way you can slide the bone in and sew it down without having to fight with the open edge. And then I've got to turn all of this under so I can hand sew that. This is the opening side of things, so that is going to be part of the next step of operations. Just watch your fingers, don't burn yourself, and if you find that you really need to, you can use your tailor's ham to kind of put this over top. Make sure that you curve it in the direction you're going to be wearing it to coax it into that shape. Now, pressing your seam allowance in, and I'm kind of eyeballing the 3/8 here, pressing it in ahead of time will help. So then that way it'll be a little easier to sew it. This is not the easiest thing because it's the most curvy part. The lining will be easier to attach than the front, so your best bet, if you have to crease anything, do it from the front, and you can always come back and iron it again later. And now we have to put the last of the bones in. I do it like we did last time for a boning channel. We're just gonna cram it in, scooch it into that seam allowance as best we can, and sew over top of it without actually breaking a needle. So I've got the bone in here, and I'm gonna gonna shove it over as far as I can. You might be able to see the bridge of it. It's right here. So we've got the other bone here. We're gonna put the other bone right in here, and then the grommets are gonna go in this space here. So I've got my zipper foot in, and I'm just gonna sew over top. And before I go too much further, where's my safety goggles? I think I packed them from school. So now I have this gap to sew up. So what we're going to do is we're going to hand sew this piece up across the bottom of both panels, and then we're going to press it. So to do this, we're going to do what is called as a blind stitch. Okay, so to do the blind stitch, typically you want your needle and you've got thread and you've got your needle. I'm not beeswaxing it because I find taking the time to sit there and beeswax stuff, yes, I'm sure it's beneficial, but I find it just takes a lot of time, and half the time, because it's really dry in my apartment, the beeswax just crumbles on the thread anyway, and then it sticks, and then it just winds up causing me more trouble than what it's worth. So I'm going to forgo doing beeswax. You can if you want to. I know a lot of people suggest it. I'm not going to do it. So essentially you want to turn in your seam allowance, pin it as you need it, of course, but to do the stitch, you go under and keep the knot on the inside of the garment. Take up a little bit of this seam here. This is going to be tricky because I'm going right at the bone here. That's why we also have a thimble to help push it through where it gets sticky. Pull it through. Then we're going to take a little bit, like you want to sew on the ridge of the seam. It will be tricky to sew past the bones, but this is one of the reasons why you have the thimble to push it through. It'll help protect your fingers. And the coutil is also kind of stiff to sew through. So again, one of the reasons why you want to protect your fingers and not hurt yourself while you're sewing your project. Is this going to be 100% perfect? No. But it will be functional. I mean, if you really want to, you could probably whip stitch it. You could possibly do other types of stitches that are not coming to my brain right now. So again, you start on the inside of the garment, and then you use this ridge of the bump of the seam allowance, because you're folding it in, to tuck all the raw edges inside, doing a small stitch, pulling it through, doing a small stitch, come on, doing a small stitch, and pulling it through and pulling it taut so that way it's almost invisible. So this is going to take me a while. I'm going to go and sit at my computer desk to do the rest of this for both panels and grab a tea or something.
2 hours later.
So we have grommet setting today. Before we get into doing anything, we need to mark out where we want our grommets to sit. I'm going to do that on the inside. Unzip this apart, flip it, so that I can have these two pieces together. Are these bouncing a little bit? Yes. But we can still work with it as long as we keep it a little bit flat while we're working on setting it up. So we have our template. What we want to do is figure out where we want the holes. The holes here are a guideline. If you need to change them up, you can. So we're going to line this up in essentially the middle between these two bones. So you have a bone here and you have a bone here. You want it in the middle. That's what the ruler's for. The ruler is your guideline to tell you how much room you have to try and center it. Now I've got about 1.25 inches, and I'm using the seam here as a guideline, which means I need to make it just a little bit over 1/2 inch. So we're going to make it 5/8 where the middle is. And we're going to want to do that by marking it on essentially the top and the bottom right there. That way we know that to line up the holes, it'll all be along that 5/8 line. The top and the bottom of the corset match the seam allowance notches for the 3/8. And I'm going to mark my holes. And I'm going to do the same so it's even on the other side. So the tools that we have, hole punch, setting tool, and a collection of hammers. This rawhide one is heavier. This mallet one is lighter. But in generally speaking, they're both not metal. You do not want to use metal on metal tools because it will make this wear out faster. And then you have your grommets and washers. So these washers and grommets come in 2 pieces because they're double-sided. So essentially you have a ring and you have a piece that sticks up. So the piece that goes on, it goes on like that, and then you hammer it down in here, which I will demonstrate. I wish I had brushed metal to match, but I don't. So we're going to take our hole punch. You want it smaller than the peg a little bit. For other times you want to use an awl, AWL, it up through, so then that way you don't have to punch through it. Because punching through it will weaken it, but it's really hard to get a hole that big with just an awl, so I'm gonna just punchy. If you need to get a pair of scissors. So I have my hole, it's punched. It may take a little finagling to get it in there. That goes on top. Both sides together and give it a solid thrashing. One down, 15 more to go.
Now we're just going to take a minute and set all of those grommets in so that we can finish off the corset.
Going to get out our very high-tech shoelaces. We're going to get out our high-tech shoelaces. Hello? How do you open this?
Now we're going to lace it all up and then onto the reveal.
Thank you once again for watching this video. If you happen to enjoy it and like what you see, please like, subscribe, and comment to boost the algorithm. Pass it along to a friend who may find this interesting. Also, please note that I am not currently working at this point in time. I am currently a student in college for multiple courses that are part-time in order to be able to absorb and get the best grades possible for the fashion design course, bits and pieces in their continuing education programs. Now, with that said, I am not currently making any money, so if you happen to enjoy what you see, if you enjoy my content, if you would like to help out personally with any of my projects, schoolwork, tuition, textbooks, or even just to help keep me caffeinated, the link to my Ko-Fi page is in the descriptor box down below. Also keep in mind I have several projects on the go, like I am currently padding out a dress form that has Phosshape as a outer coating. I will go into Phoshape and some hat making stuff a little later on. I have that in the works, it's just time. With that said, I'm also working on a book. Yes, this is a page from the book. It will be completely handwritten. Why? Because I don't like AI and where it's going right now. I know it will improve eventually, however, there needs to be legislation to prevent people from stealing other people's stuff. With that said, keep in mind, I will also be typing out a version of this book for those of you who require an audio component as from a text-to-speech feature. This book will probably go on my Ko-Fi for maybe $2 at maybe $5 at the most. And with this book, this involves everything from here, downloading it onto paper for how to sew things. If you are a brand new beginner and have never sewn anything before, or even for those of you who are more advanced, it could be a refresher course for those of you out there. And I do have physical samples inside the book, such as this, which I plan on either photographing or scanning. I haven't quite figured that out yet. This will also include all of my scribbles and corrections and some hopefully understandable diagrams. And I also have a notes section on each of the margins for those of you out there who want to print this out for yourselves. I also have a section where I'm leaving a margin for you to print it out and hole punch it into a binder for future reference. I'm still working on this. This will take a little while. That is a future project. With that said, thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye for now.